In this nugget, we will understand how to build image using Docker commit. The other way to creating image is to convert a running container into an image. Docker provides us a way to create new images from the changes or additions made to the container. You can think about this method pretty much similar to a commit in a version control system. We create a container, make changes to those containers, and then commit those changes to a new image. We can either use a Docker commit or Docker container commit command, the latter being in line with the Docker container parent command, as this operation is being performed on a container. So let's get back to our Docker host. Let's create a container from Ubuntu latest image. Docker run -itd --rm. I'll give it name as test Ubuntu 1. And it will use the Ubuntu latest image. So it is downloading the image now, and it will start the container. Let's do docker ps, and the container is started, as we can see. Now once the container is up, we will exec to this container, docker exec -it. I'll use the ID of the container and bash. Okay, so I'm inside the container now. I will run an update apt-get -yqq update. Okay, so now we will start Apache. Okay, so apt-get -y install Apache 2. Okay, so it is now installing Apache. It should be done in less than a minute. Okay, so we will just pause it and come back when it is done. Okay, so now Apache is installed. Now we will exit from the container. So now we have started a container and installed Apache within it. We are going to use this container as a web server, and we will save it in its current state. That is going to save our time in creating a container every time we want to create a container with Apache on it. We will commit this container now by using the docker container commit command. Test Ubuntu 1, it's the name of our container. Pushpam Saxena /Apache 1.0. I have used this as a repository name as Pushpam Saxena Apache 1.0. 1.0 is the version. So if I do my docker image ls now, we see that the image has been created. By default, a container is being committed and its processes will be paused while the container is being committed. This reduces the likelihood of encountering the data corruption during the process of creating the commit. If this behavior is undesired, we can set the option --pause to false. The option message commits the message, and the option author provides an author to the image. The change option will apply Docker file instructions to the image that is being created. Using this option, you can make changes to the Docker image which is being created from the container. So let's use some of these options while creating an image from the container. So let's get back to our host now. So we will create the image from the same container now. Say docker container commit. I'll provide a message here as a new image, and give the author as Pushpam Saxena. And then our container test Ubuntu 1, the name. And the image name Pushpam Saxena slash Apache, and the tag I'm giving is 2.0 this time. Okay, so now let's run docker image ls. Okay, so now we see that both the images are now rebuilt. We can inspect the image to check the message and the author. So the docker image inspect, and we will give this the repository, and I will grep for comment because the message gets saved as comment. So there I see the message that we'd given, and similarly we can search for the author, which is the same as Pushpam Saxena that we provided. Let's pin a container from it. Docker run -itd -p-at Pushpam Saxena slash Apache 2.0, and I'm publishing the port 80 for the external access. We will do the docker ps to get the container details. The container is running successfully. Let's exec into this container. Docker exec -it and use this container ID and bash. So I'm inside the container now. I'll run the command ls/etc/init.d. We can see that Apache 2 is installed here. I will run the service tomcat 2 status to check the status of this service. Service Apache 2 status. It is not running. So let's start it. Start. Okay, now let's see the status. And now it is running. I'll exit from the container. And I'll again run the docker ps. And the port 80 is published as the port 32768. So let's access it from the external network now. The external IP address my docker host is 35.231.235.139, and let's provide the port 32768. So we see that we get to the Apache 2 page. Yeah. So in this section we ran the container, make changes to it in the writable layer, and then committed an image from it. When we instantiated a container from it, that container had all the changes in it. Hello everyone. In this nugget, we will understand how to push images to the Docker Hub. By now, we know that the default registry is Docker Hub. If we want to connect to any other registry, then the Docker pull commands need to have the registry server address mentioned before the repository name. If we don't specify anything, it means that we are connecting to the Docker Hub only, which is by default. We don't need to have an account to pull images from the Docker Hub. However, for pushing images, we need to have an account. So let's go back to the Docker Hub portal now, hub.docker.com. I am already logged in with my account Pushpam Saxena here. I already have a few repositories created under my account. Now note that these are user repositories and preceded by the username Pushpam Saxena. Okay. So on our Docker host, we need to log in with the account credentials. So let's run the command docker login -u Pushpam Saxena. It will ask for a password. Once I provide the password, Now I am logged in successfully. Let us now push the above created image to the Docker host. So for that I'll require the push command. So let's do that. Docker push and the image that we are pushing, that is push from Saxena Apache :2.0. Okay, so now the pushing is in progress. It will go layer by layer, so it might take couple of seconds out here. Okay, so we will wait for this thing to complete. Okay, so now let me do a refresh over our Docker host. This repository is now available on the Docker Hub. See, we have the additional one also for the Apache. On the Docker Hub, if I push the earlier image, that is Pushpam Saxena Apache 1.0, it will also show up under the same repository as another tagged image. Okay, so let's do that. Push 1.0, it will also follow. Okay, so the above was about the user level repository. We had learned earlier that users are not allowed to push images to system repository. So let's see it in our Docker host now. Yeah, so I have these. If you go inside now my Docker host, you will see 1.0 and 2.0, both the images existing out here. Okay, now the above was about the user level repository. We had learned earlier that users are not allowed to push images to the system repository. So let's see it on our Docker host now. I will now tag the previous image as a top level repository 2.0 and Pushpam's Apache 1.0. Now let's try to push it. Docker push Pushpam Apache. We'll just copy paste this one and then hit enter. Now as you can see, we get an error message that the requested access to the resource is denied. Right? So this is not allowed. So now we saw that we can push the images to a user level repository only. In this nugget, we will understand the commonly used instructions in Dockerfile. We have seen a few of them in the example we just covered. So where we created an image from Dockerfile, we will get into some of the more details now. The arg instructions defines a variable that users can pass at build time using the build arg, the variable name and the value for it. Optionally, there can be a default value as well, which can be provided within the Docker file. The from instruction specifies the base image from which you are building. A Docker file must start with the from instruction. The image can be any valid image. In the Docker file, from may only be preceded by one or more arg instructions, which declare arguments that are used in from lines in the Docker file. The format is arg code version equals to latest from base. Now base is the repository name and then code version specifies the tag. From can appear multiple times within a single Docker file to create multiple images or use one build stage as a dependency for another. Before the Docker CLI sends the context to the Docker daemon, it looks for a file named dockerignore in the root directory of the context. If this file exists, the CLI modifies the context to exclude files and directories that match patterns in it. This helps to avoid unnecessarily sending large or sensitive files and directories to the daemon. The CLI interprets the .dockerignore file as new line separated list of patterns similar to the files globs of Unix shells. If the line in the docker ignore file starts with the hash in column 1, then this line is considered as a command and is ignored before being interpreted by the CLI. For example, the following patterns would be excluded from being copied over the Docker daemon. Any file that starts with a dot or readme files or docker compose.yml files, all files of type .yaml, okay, is going to be ignored. Parser directives are returned as a special type of comment in the form hash directive equals to value. Parser directives are optional and instruct Docker's daemon how to handle the content as per the directives. They impact the subsequent lines of the Docker file, and therefore our parser directives must be at the very top of the Docker file. Once a comment, empty line or builder instruction has been processed, the Docker no longer looks for parser directives. Instead, it treats anything formatted as a parser directive as a comment and does not attempt to validate it, and it might be a parser directive. Validate if it is a parser directive or not. Currently, escape and syntax are only supported directive. We can define the escape character for the parser as the pound escape and then is equal to the backtick. It sets the character used to escape characters in the Docker file. The syntax directive defines the location of the Docker file builder that is used for building the current Docker file. The parser directives do not add layers to the build and will not be shown as a build step. Parser directives are not case sensitive. However, convention is for them to be lowercase. A single directive may only be used once. The run instruction will execute any commands in new layer of the top of the current image and commit the results. The resulting committed image will be the result for the next step in the Docker file. In our example of creating the Docker image from Docker file, we use run command for getting the system updates and installing Nginx on the Ubuntu box. Now, run can be used in two forms. The shell form is run command, and the command is run in the shell, which by default is binsh on Linux. And the second is exec form, which is run executable, and this followed by the parameters this way. Now, the main purpose of CMD is to provide defaults for an executing container. The CMD instruction sets the command to be executed when running the image. CMD can be used independently, again in two forms. That is, the first form is the shell form, wherein we give the CMD command followed by the parameters, list of parameters, and the next is the exec form, in which CMD followed by executable, and it is also followed by the list of parameters. It can also be used in conjunction with entry point, wherein CMD just provides the default parameters for entry point. There can only be one CMD instruction in a Docker file. If you list more than one CMD, then only the last CMD will take effect. We can also provide commands along with the Docker run. While running the container, any command line arguments passed with the Docker run command will override all elements specified using CMD. Run actually runs a command and commits the result as an image. CMD does not execute anything at build time but specifies the intended command for the container. So that's the difference from run. Okay. Going forward, the entry point says the command and parameters that will be executed first when the container is run. It allows you to configure a container that will run as an executable. Again, the entry point can be used in two forms. First is the shell form, in which the entry point command is followed with the parameter list. Entry point, the command, and the parameter list. Second is exec form, in which you have the entry point and then executable followed by the parameter list. If you would like your container to run the same executable every time, then you should consider using entry point in combination with CMD. Command line arguments passed with Docker run append the entry point command and override the CMD elements in the Docker file. Just like CMD, there can only be one entry point instruction in the Docker file. If you list more than one entry point, then only the last one will take effect. We can override the entry point instruction using the docker run -- entry point flag in this. env command is used to set the environment variables, one or more, during the image build process. It consists of key value pairs which can be accessed within the container by scripts and applications. The workdir instruction provides a way to set the working directory for a container. The workdir instruction sets the working directory for any instruction that follows it in the Docker file. If the work directory workdir doesn't exist, it will be created. The workdir instruction can be used multiple times in a Docker file if a relative path is provided. It will be relative to the path of the previous workdir instructions. The add instruction copies new files, directories, or remove file URLs from the source and adds them to the file system of the image at the path specified as destination. The destination is an absolute path or a path relative to workdir into which the source will be copied inside the destination container. The source path can be a file or a directory inside the context of the build. It can be a URL or it can be a local compressed file also. For example, add latest.tar.gz and the destination is /var/www/WordPress. So this will unpack the latest.tar.gz archive into the var www WordPress directory. The copy instructions copies new files or directories from source and adds them to the file system of the container at the path specified by the destination. The copy instruction is closely related to the add instruction. The key difference in between these two is that the copy instruction is purely focused on copying local files from the build context and does not have any extraction or decompression capabilities. Let's look at the example of copy instruction. This will copy files from the conf.d directory to the /etc/apache2 directory. The source is a directory and the destination ends with a trailing slash. So it will be considered as a directory, and the entire contents of the source are copied to the destination directory. If the destination does not end with the trailing slash, it is considered as a regular file and the contents of the source are written and not copied at the destination. Now in this nugget, we have covered the important Dockerfile instructions from the examination point of view. There are still a few instructions which we haven't covered here. So please refer to the Dockerfile reference on Docker documentation for information about them.